All right, welcome you guys. Today we're here with Rick and we're going to be talking about just addiction a little bit. So we've been doing these series about just ending the stigma and kind of talking about mental health and addiction. A lot of times it goes hand in hand, but we want to look at both sides of it just so we could kind of get a better perspective of it and just really start understanding how what addiction may look like, and maybe you're going through something like this and we just want to have a conversation. So today we're talking with Rick, and he's going to be sharing his story with us, which just to let you guys know is sometimes hard, but at the same time, it's important to talk about things so we could process them, but also help build awareness for other people around us. So, what we want to do is just kind of listen and hear about Rick's story. He said that he'd share with us, so we just want to kind of talk about it and have a conversation. Just let you guys join us and in on it too.
Okay, you want me to start with my story?
Yeah, so Rick, if you could just share with us your story a little bit, what you've gone through, and where you're at right now in your
Okay.
recovery too.
Okay, well, like I was telling you earlier, growing up, alcohol was always a part of my life.
Yeah.
It was never not there. My father was an alcoholic. He never hit bottom, so to speak. He worked a job and retired from that job. Was successful in his work, but he was an alcoholic. He drank to excess many times. So growing up, I thought that that's the way things were.
Yeah.
That every family was the same, and this is the way things are. The men worked and drank, and that's just the way it was.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until until my teen years when I started going to other people's houses to visit or whatnot. Kids would get together, this is in the 1970s. Kids would get together and I'd think, wow, they're having a party, a celebration, and yeah, there's alcohol here, but the adults aren't drunk.
Mm-hmm.
Odd. So that's the way I grew up, and even early in my drinking years, I just thought that was the normal thing. That's what you were supposed to do,
Yeah.
or that was just a normal part of life. It wasn't until I went into my first rehab when I was 52 years old.
So you went into rehab when you were 52. What age do you think you started to drink at?
Oh, well, I first started to drink at 16.
16. All right.
Yeah. Now, just like many kids, it was a weekend thing.
Yeah.
It was we were limited by our financial, how much money we had in our pocket,
Yeah,
determined how
kids.
much we drank. And then later, in adulthood, I was very fortunate. I'm in a good career field. I always had good jobs, and that was, looking back, that was good and it was bad. My thought was, well, yeah, I drink, but I've got a great job. I'm not in
Yeah.
trouble with my work. I do good at work. I can't be an alcoholic.
So you're a functioning alcoholic.
Yeah, I was a functioning alcoholic. I had never heard that term, functioning alcoholic, basically until I was probably in my 40s. And my sister pointed it out. She said, you're an alcoholic, you're just functioning alcoholic.
Now, did you drink at work, or was it mainly after work? Then you
It
started to drink.
was mainly after work.
All right.
Yeah, it was mainly after work and on the weekends. Now later on in my addiction, there were times that I did drink at work, and that's when the revelation really started to hit me. And it wasn't that I was drinking because I wanted to get a buzz. I was so sick from drinking, the only way to stop the sickness was to drink more.
Yeah.
Hair of the dog, so to speak. And I can remember, I never really believed that for the longest time, because I could remember having hangovers and thinking the last thing I want to do is drink. But when I discovered that you could get well by drinking more, that was the beginning of the end for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what point do you think you went from just drinking on the weekends to almost drinking daily? Is that what you would say it was?
Probably in my mid-40s.
Mid-40s? Mm-hmm. So more went from like just maybe a couple nights a week and weekends to almost every night, and then maybe even a couple times at work?
Yes, that's exactly the way it went. And it went even before it got, to where I was drinking every day. I would sometimes go a week, 2 weeks without drinking, and then I would tie one on.
That's
and
good.
just thought, well, that's just normal, I didn't drink for 2.5 weeks, and me and a couple buddies got drunk watching a football game, no big deal.
Yeah. Do you think there's like an event that had that shift happen? Like,
No,
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 nothing happened.
no,
No life circumstances or
no,
anything like that. No
no,
loss. Nothing.
no.
It just went from all right, here I
It
am.
was like they say, it's a gradual disease.
Yeah.
It just graduated and graduated and graduated and graduated. Looking back, there was no event, there was no thing that happened. As a matter of fact, we lost our first child when my wife and I were 27 years old. We lost our first child.
So you had that major event, and that never affected or caused you to drink
No,
more.
during all that time, Dustin was born with a diaphragmatic hernia, and he never left the
Mm.
hospital. He was in neonatal intensive care the entire time. And we would go to like my in-laws' house, and they were normies, completely normies. They would have a glass of wine
Yeah.
or a beer. They didn't drink like my family drank. And they would offer me do you want a glass of wine to,
Maybe
kind of
relax.
relax? And I can remember thinking and telling them, no, I don't want to drink right now because of this horrible thing that we're going through.
Now, how did you process the loss of your son? Did you? I mean, that must be a pretty big thing, right? I mean, losing a child is a
Yeah,
pretty
it was
big
a huge
event, right?
thing. It was a terrible, terrible thing to go through. Dustin lived for 12 weeks in neonatal intensive care at Seton, and yeah, it was a long, terrible thing. The the way we got through it really was we got pregnant right away after he passed away, and Dustin was born May 21st, 1984, and Chris, my son, who is now 39, was born May 22nd, 1985.
So it was 85, and then, so how old were you in 85, if you don't mind me asking?
I would have been 28.
28, and then you said around 40 is when you started to, so
Yeah.
that's almost when your son or your, son that survived, what age would you say he was at?
Probably 15, 16.
15, 16, so getting older,
Yeah.
going in high school.
Yeah. Starting high school, wanting to be on his own, doesn't want mom and dad around.
Because what I realize a lot of times is like we hold things in, especially us men, we don't process things,
Yeah.
right? So we hold
Right.
it in, and when kids are young, they keep us so busy that we don't
Exactly
even have
right.
time to process things, right? So that's how you said you got over it with your wife, is you guys just had another baby right
Yeah.
away. So to me, I'm just kind of thinking maybe it goes hand in hand, because once he started to get older and more independent and didn't need mom and dad as much, maybe that was the thing where you actually had to start trying to deal with, wow, we actually lost his son, we lost a
Right.
baby, and now this one's getting older and he may leave here in a couple years.
Yes.
And sometimes I notice that just with people with addiction, a lot of times the addiction really isn't the problem. It's the solution for the problem, because there's something a little bit deeper that we never talk about.
That's exactly right. There's a number of things. Everybody has tragedies in their life. We had tragedy with Dustin. I had a horrible event when I was a teenager with sexual molestation, and I didn't deal with all that properly at the time. And then, of course, that feeling of separation when your child, who needs you so much all the time,
Yeah.
day in and day out, every minute of every day it seems like, and then suddenly they're a teenager and they're like, I really don't want to be around you, Dad. Please
Yeah.
drop me off 2 blocks from school. That whole thing came together like all at once, it seemed like, and I didn't recognize it at the time. It took me going through all of that and the drinking getting out of hand, and for the longest time I just wouldn't admit to myself that I had all these tragedies in my life that happened, and I'd never dealt with them properly, didn't know how to deal with them, because I thought alcohol was the only solution
Well,
to anything.
To tell you the truth, from what you saw from your parents and your dad, that was the solution. That's how he did
Yeah.
deal with things. That's how you deal with things. And if that's what you see, that's what you learn.
That's
if that's
right.
what you learn, that's how
That's right.
you process it. That's how you're processing it. That's how you deal with it. And a lot of times, I know for myself, it's kind of the same thing. And, life was pretty good until I was 40. And all of a sudden, I ended up getting a divorce, which isn't the same thing as losing somebody or whatever. But I still had kids. And then I found myself at some point, like, I had to deal with all the things from when I was younger. And when I was younger, to be honest, I didn't know how to deal with them. So I just kept,
Just keep
stuffing
them
them.
inside.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you just stuff them. And sometimes we build up walls, and we keep building up these walls. And I realized that one day, all these walls I built were actually just a trap for me.
Yeah.
And they trapped me in because I didn't build a door, I didn't build a window, I didn't have any way to get
Yeah.
out of those.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, those walls, um, they don't support themselves. They take
No.
emotions, they take feelings, and they also take stories that we have to tell ourselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes when we have to start dealing with those, it's easier to turn to maybe alcohol or a drug substance or abuse than to actually deal with it, or we don't even know how. So it's like, all right, this is what I do know what to do. I have drank and it makes me feel better and not think about it.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and do this.
And it's such a natural response. I don't think I ever really had the conscious thought, okay, I had all these things, when I was in my addiction.
Yeah.
I didn't stop and think, oh, wow, I've had all these things happen to me. I'm going to drink to get rid of them. It's just by drinking, I didn't deal with them and didn't have to deal with them. They were put to the side. There was never a conscious thought or pattern to say, oh, we lost Dustin 15 years ago. I'm going to drink because of that. It wasn't like that. It's just I knew to drink made me feel better. And that's
Well,
what
usually
I did.
your conscious doesn't really think of it, but
Yeah.
subconsciously that's
Yeah.
what you're doing and what you're
Exactly
using
right.
to actually feel better.
Yeah.
So it could definitely be hard. I think just as people, I could say men because it's easy for me to say because I'm a man. And I feel like sometimes men don't talk about stuff and women tell us man up and all this. So we have to hold in our emotions. And sometimes
Sure.
the only healthy emotion we could show is anger,
Yeah.
even though it's not really that healthy. But when we have to start dealing with these other emotions and the things that we felt and the things that we have to actually process,
Right.
that's when sometimes addiction becomes easier than
Oh, yeah.
dealing with the reality.
Yeah. It does. Yeah.
So now you're getting into your 40s. You realize that you went from maybe weekend drinking and drinking once in a while to full-time drinking to maybe even binge drinking.
Yes. Yeah.
So what would binge drinking look like to you? Because I know we could use that term, but not everybody knows what it looks like. Or maybe to somebody, a binge drinking is just a couple beers or a couple shots of whiskeys and they're done. Or maybe they do it every day for 3 weeks and then they stop or something like that.
Binge drinking for me, when I first started, was I would stay drunk all weekend. I had a pretty long career of drinking, so I believe that this is right, that at first, when I first started binge drinking, I knew the level that I could get to and still fool everyone, so to speak.
Make them think you're all
So if there was a family event or something going on like that, I would hide my drinking, but I would get to a buzz level, so to speak, and I would stay there the entire weekend.
Now, what time would you start drinking? What time would you stop drinking?
Depending on what time the family event was.
And you feel like you had family events most every weekend?
Not every weekend, but at first, my point was, at first my binge drinking was family events because, quite frankly, my wife and my family would be so busy with either hosting things at our house or interacting with other people. There's enough people around that people aren't focused on you.
Yeah.
Right? You can kind of be in the background. You can be watching football with the guys. Meanwhile, I'd have a fifth of vodka in my, or not a fifth, but a pint of vodka in my boot,
Yeah.
sneaking in the bathroom, taking drinks. And I did that for a long time and maintained it, probably all through my late 30s, early 40s, and then probably at some point in my 40s, it became more and more difficult to hide it. And
Do you feel like it's more difficult to hide because the circumstances changed, or you just wanted it more and you couldn't really
Both.
control as much?
Both.
Yeah.
My wife became more aware. Early on in our marriage, it was a routine for us to have a beer or two while we grilled hamburgers or something.
Did she drink, or how?
She did, yeah, but she's a complete normie. She doesn't drink now, but alcohol was never a problem for her or any of her family members. They're all, well, her parents are passed away now, but her mother could have a glass of wine. Her father could have one beer.
And that's
My
all they
wife was
did.
the same way. I can remember thinking we would go out to dinner and she would get a margarita and drink all but the last little bit of it. And I would think, well, that's alcohol abuse right there.
Don't want to waste that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's that type. She was that type of drinker. When my drinking became out of hand, so to speak, is when she totally.
So she quit when she saw.
Yeah, she saw what was going on. It wasn't that important to her. It wasn't a part of her life growing up. So.
That's good. So she pretty much gave it up because she saw that it was influencing you.
Yes.
That's good. So you said you had mentioned earlier that you went from maybe, drinking on the weekends to now you realize in their 40s is a problem, and then I think you talked earlier and said that in your 50s you checked into rehab for the first time.
52 years old.
Now, what made you decide, hey, I'm going to check myself into rehab? Was that something your wife wanted, or was that because you got in trouble and you had to go, or is it just you said?
No, I didn't get in trouble. I had trouble with my wife. My marriage was in trouble.
All right.
Because of my drinking. And
so did she want you to go, or did you want to go? Or,
she wanted me to do something.
And you figured this is the only thing I know.
And I didn't know what else to do. I was at the point where I was drinking every day. I wasn't drinking at work yet, but I could tell. I could look out and think, okay, this is getting out of hand.
Yeah.
So I worked. Like I said, I've been fortunate, been blessed to work at big companies with good insurance. It can be good, a blessing, or
Yeah.
it could be a curse, Like I said earlier in this conversation, I can't be an alcoholic. I've got this great job.
Yeah.
So the easiest thing for me to do to basically get people off of my back and to get some relief was to go into rehab. And that's what I did.
So you didn't really do as much for you. You did it just
No,
for the situation and circumstances.
Yes. Yeah.
In hopes that it got better. So
And I want to say this, like I told you earlier before the camera started rolling, I've done everything.
Yeah.
I've done rehab. I've done inpatient rehab. I've done outpatient rehab. I've done detox. I've done AA. I've done and tried everything. And for me, what I found was none of those will keep me sober.
well, if you don't want to be sober.
If you don't want to be sober, and if you're not right in your spiritual life, then you're not going to be sober.
Yeah.
If you're doing it for somebody else, or if you're thinking, oh, I'll go into rehab, and when I get out of rehab,
I'm gonna be
that
fine.
light switch is turned off, and I no longer want to drink. Well, guess what? You get out of rehab, and life comes crashing down on you. Everything that you've been ignoring for the past 10 or 15 years is suddenly right there in your face staring at you.
Yeah.
And you have to deal with it. And 30 days of rehab is just not enough time to get to an education level or to get an understanding of what this disease really is.
And they say it takes 21 days to create a new habit, but it technically takes longer, somewhere closer to like 60 to 70 days to break one of those habits that you've created.
Yeah.
So unless you're, and a lot of times, like, this is what I've realized with a lot of people is, let's say you go to rehab, right? Well, you're getting rid of that. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of things that you haven't dealt with, but there's also something that has been filling you for 40 years or 50 years, right?
Right.
And then if you remove that without replacing that,
Right.
all you're going to do is fill a void, and you're going to feel emptiness. And then those stresses and anxieties and everything that you're going through almost intensify instead of, oh, I'm sober now, all my problems are solved.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. And a lot
No,
of
it
times
doesn't.
it makes it almost worse, just because now you have that void to where before you had something at least filling that void.
Exactly right.
Like I mentioned before, I don't think alcohol's always the problem. A lot of times I think it's the actual solution.
That's exactly
for
right.
your problems.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you use the alcohol to mask your problems, to get over your problems. The alcohol is not the problem.
It's the
At
coping
first,
mechanism.
it's the solution, and then it becomes the problem.
Yeah. And that's one thing I think we all have to try to look at is just like, all right, in our addictions or whatever we're going through, like, maybe you're taking 30 days, but what are you replacing that habit with? Because you're so focused on not doing that bad habit or the addiction or so much, but then that's all you're focusing on, and you're not trying to create a new habit to where
That's
if
right.
we focus on maybe replacing that with something to fill it with something different compared to drinking or, doing something bad or unhealthy,
Right.
finding something, a healthier coping mechanism, a lot of times we could overcome those addictions. And a lot of times it's not going to be in 30 days. 30 days is just like, hey, here's the sobriety and you could get out of your environment. But if you don't really come up with a strategy after that, you're almost going to end up back in the same thing. That's what a lot of
Yeah.
people do. Most people go to rehab more than one time. Usually it's,
Oh yeah,
if they're
I
young,
went
they
more than
go,
one time.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so you went to rehab, you went for 30 days, then you got out, and what was that like?
The very first time that I went to rehab and I got out, I was sober for 9 months,
Oh, all right, that's good.
which is a pretty long time for somebody that went from drinking every single day to sober 9 months.
So what happened after the 9 months?
Well, here's the thing, and this is my journey. I can't speak for other people,
Yeah.
but my journey was, it was never a big event, ever, not one single time when I relapsed, and I relapsed numerous times. There was never, my wife was pissed off and threw me out of the house,
Nothing
or
like
I
that.
lost my job, or I crashed my car, or my kid had a terrible accident. Nothing, nothing. Every single time that I relapsed, if nothing else, looking at it now, I would get into a comfort zone. I would get into this comfort zone with my sobriety.
Yeah.
And I would stop, and I don't want to say I would have to keep it on my mind all the time, but I would stop appreciating the struggle that I had to get sober, and I would start to take it for granted. All
Yeah.
right, and then once I take it for granted, then the next step is real easy. Just fool yourself. Think, okay, I've been sober 9 months.
Yeah, we've gone long.
I got
For
this.
a while,
I can
yeah.
have a beer. I can stop after work and have a beer with the guys. Well, guess what? No, I couldn't. Maybe I could at first have a beer with the guys on Monday, not drink on Tuesday. Wednesday, you know what? I'm going to get 6-pack on the way home
Yeah.
and drink 3 beers that night. And then before you know it, I'm right back into my addiction.
Right back in the cycle, yeah.
So it was, everybody's story is different. I've been to enough rehabs and AA enough that I've heard all of the horrible, horrible stories that people go through, from losing everything and living behind a dumpster to having a car wreck and killing one of their kids to, all these horrible, horrible things. And with me, in my 40s and 50s, none of those horrible things happened to me. It was just, I would get comfortable with sobriety, and I would think, I've got this. We blew that way out of proportion. I can drink. Well, no, I can't.
Did you ever try to replace your addiction with something else healthier, maybe like exercise or maybe in like art or something that was more creative or?
Yeah, I did. And there are things that I do. I have an old truck that I recently bought, a 1978 Chevy truck that I'm working on. And I like to build things around the house. But there again, if you get too comfortable, if I get too comfortable in my sobriety, thinking, no problem, I got this, that's the danger point for me. And many of my relapses were, I would stop drinking, this is it, I'm done, and then almost, not to the day, but within a month, the 3 to 4 month time frame, it's like, okay, I've got this. I can have a drink. I've been sober for 4 months. I can have one drink. So that was and is the danger point.
So if you recognize that pattern, what do you think you could do to maybe overcome that pattern? Because a lot of times if we recognize it, that's the hardest part, right? It's like, hey, when I start getting comfortable and I kind of just fall back a little bit, that's when, I start getting back into my addiction. What do you think you could do to start thinking about like different ways that you can maybe overcome that? Because if you already know it's going to happen and we keep doing the same thing over and over,
Right.
I mean, a lot of times we have to just try to figure out something that is going to be different or that we could do that will be different. Because if we consciously know or subconsciously know that it's going to happen.
Okay. The answer for me for that is to let the people in my life know. Okay, here we are. I'm at the 3.5. I'm at the 4-month mark. I'm at the 5-month mark, and I'm worried.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, I wouldn't do that. I'd just keep it to myself and think, I've got this. I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
I think maybe reopening the book on my sobriety, intensifying my conversations with God, intensifying my true conversations with my wife, with my kids. Both of my children are now adults, Chris and Shannon. Just telling them, you know, it's been some time that I've been sober now. I just want to revisit and make sure that I stay sober. And I'm not even sure what those conversations would really look like. They just need to happen. I don't need to rehearse them. I just need to, you know, one day say what I'm really feeling.
Have you ever thought about maybe like journaling? I know for men sometimes it doesn't really seem like that good of a thing to do, but I've been journaling for a while. Sometimes it helps me keep myself in check because then I could write it down, have time to process and think about it. So then I know like, oh, you know what? I better start having these conversations because spending time with yourself and thinking about it. But then another thing I was thinking about is, have you ever thought about like when you start getting to that point, maybe start mentoring somebody else so there's a different level of accountability for you? Because it's different, like maybe your wife keeping you accountable, but like after you guys have been together so long, it's like, all right, well maybe that's not enough. But when you start helping somebody else and you start feeding into them, what I realize is when you're doing that, there's a different level of accountability. Sometimes that will help you overcome it because now there's somebody else that's looking up to you and trying to figure out how they could get their sobriety.
My God, my God, He parts the